Sri Lanka has declared a state of public emergency. An emergency of this extent is needed when a country is facing a medical disaster, bioterrorist attacks, responding to a calamity or a catastrophic event. But in Sri Lanka, the reason is different. It is this: public anger. Hundreds of protesters held a massive demonstration in the commercial capital of Colombo. This comes a day after people tried to storm the president's house on Thursday. With a severe economic crisis unfolding in the island country, the people demanded Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation. Tear gas and water cannons were used to disperse demonstrators, but people remained undeterred. Protesters dismantled a wall and hurled bricks at the police. They even sent a bus or set a bus alight on the road leading to the president's building. At least 54 people have been arrested. The capital was placed under indefinite curfew, which now stands lifted. After the protesters were dispersed, the president's office released a statement saying that the chaos was organized by extremist groups. It said, and I quote, "Many of those involved in the violence have been arrested and many have been identified as organized extremists. They have spearheaded the protests calling for an Arab Spring in Sri Lanka." Just to remind our viewers, Arab Spring was a movement in early 2010 in West Asia, where common people took to the streets in response to high corruption and economic woes. Sri Lanka's market had the worst weekly fall ever. Losses have extended a fifth straight season. It was a bloodbath at the Colombo Stock Exchange. Dwindling foreign reserves have put pressure on the monetary system. The population of around 22 million is heavily dependent on imports. Most food products and essentials are imported in Sri Lanka. So to import food, Sri Lanka needs foreign currency reserves to pay for them. Currently, the foreign reserves are depleting at an alarming rate. In the last 2 years, foreign reserves have fallen by 70% due to India's neighborhood first policy. New Delhi provided Sri Lanka a $2.4 billion package of financial assistance. The island country houses about 3 million Tamils, so the Indian government is mulling over providing humanitarian aid to Sri Lankan Tamils. This is also important for India because many distressed Sri Lankans are coming to the nearest Indian state of Tamil Nadu. This comes ahead of IMF talks with Washington, which are scheduled in April. Until now, the Rajapaksa government had resisted reaching out to the IMF. They preferred bilateral helplines, but individual aid from allies are clearly not enough. The country is facing its biggest economic crisis since independence. After months of economic hardship, the crisis has gone from bad to worse. 12 to 13-hour-long power cuts are common. Fuel is too expensive and ration lines are getting longer. So how did things get so bad? It is a combination of many factors. Historically, Lankan governments have been weak at fiscal management. President Gotabaya was more of the same. His tax cuts were ill-timed. So was his obsession with making Sri Lanka's agriculture 100% organic. The final nail in the coffin was the COVID-19 pandemic. Sri Lanka's tourism sector is its main source of earning. It accounts for over 10% of the nation's GDP, and like most countries, the pandemic was harsh on Sri Lanka's tourism sector. Let's talk more about this and the situation unfolding in Sri Lanka. Joining us live from Melbourne is Amantha Pereira, who is a researcher at Central Queensland University. Amantha, welcome to WION. How do you assess the situation in Sri Lanka?
I would probably agree with you when you said that it's the worst that we've seen since independence. It's not clear what's actually happening in Colombo right now because there is protest by the public that is taking place. There is a state of emergency that is in place, but the core of the issue is not actually political. It's actually whether people can, provide food for their families. I was speaking to somebody who's in Colombo today, and the answer that I got was, this is about whether I can have food on my table today. So I think what we're talking about today is the fact that whether the government can provide electricity continuously, whether the government can provide a continuous supply of fuel, and whether the increase in the cost of living is going to be stemmed. That is what we're talking about today.
Amantha, there are calls by Sri Lankans to remove the Rajapaksas from power. Will this save the country?
Well, the fact is that the Rajapaksas probably are at their lowest in terms of popularity right now. And that is quite a significant development in Sri Lanka. Because if you look at what's happening, what has been happening since 2005, the Rajapaksa family has probably been the most bankable in terms of political leadership in Sri Lanka since 2005. But right now, they are probably at their lowest. But whether they are going to go or whether they are going to resign without a fight, it's still not clear. So the next few days will probably make it clear whether the Rajapaksa are going to recede without a fight, or whether it's going to be a much more protracted political arbitration that's going to take place.
Finally, Amantha, just a simple question. Who or what can save Sri Lanka now?
I think it's going to be the people's will. That's what is going to save Sri Lanka right now. For so long, Sri Lankans have been voting for a populist leadership, a leadership that appealed to their senses much more than to their intelligence. Right now, where Sri Lanka stands right now, Sri Lankans will have to decide with their brains rather than from their heads, whether they have to decide what leadership is going to lead the country to a stable economic situation. That's what's going to decide. Whether Sri Lankans can do that, I guess the next week will show, and we will see whether Sri Lankans can vote or decide from their heads rather than from their hearts.
All right, live from Melbourne, Amantha Pereira, who is a researcher at Central Queensland University. Thank you very much for making time and for talking to WION today.
My pleasure.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.